Well, hello everyone. From around the world, you're watching Venturous Group Smart City Tech Week, and today we're talking about smart buildings. And our theme today is how not to have dumb buildings. We have a lot of very senior engaged people around, and my name is Benson Tam, and I'm your moderator today. And I'm the founder and CEO of Venturous Group. With that, I will let each of our speakers and our panelists introduce themselves. So Will, please.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Will Cavendish. I'm the Global Digital Services Leader at Arup, the Global Architecture Engineering Consultancy. As Global Digital Services Leader, I'm responsible for understanding the amazing things that are happening in digital technology and trying to ensure that Arup has the skills and capabilities and offers to change the world.
Great. Vincent?
Hi, I'm Vincent See. I'm head of new ventures at Swire Properties, a mixed-use developer based in Hong Kong with properties in Hong Kong, Chinese mainland, Southeast Asia, and the United States. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So over to you, Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Wong. I run a new department within MTR called the Global Innovation Department. And in that role, we have two objectives. One is how do we support all of our core businesses with new technologies, including our buildings? And then number two, in a fast-moving environment, how do we find new types of business opportunities and build ventures, new business ventures for MTR? So that is my role.
Thank you. Thomas.
Hi, I am Thomas Pang. I am a co-founder of Venturous Group, which specializes in invest, build, and operate city tech companies. And I also double in as the acting CEO of a very important investment we have made now, which is a joint venture with Arup called Neuron.
Great. So today we started with two presentations, starting with Will, and then next we'll have Vincent. So Will, over to you.
Hi there, everybody. So I'm going to talk for the next 10 or 15 minutes, giving a bit of a global perspective on smart buildings. Where have we got to? What seem like the big opportunities? How are things emerging? Let me start by saying that after years of rhetoric, it feels now that smart buildings are at last moving from the fringe to the mainstream. In certain companies, in particular, big tech companies, finance companies, banks, shared workspace companies, this is becoming front and center important for them. But in others too, in professional services companies, even in government, there's a stronger focus on actually trying to get smart buildings designed, developed, and made in practice. That's partly because I think we now generally have a much better understanding of how smart buildings can actually be architected. Now, much of the work we do for clients on smart buildings is under non-disclosure agreements. So I'm going to use an example of one of our own buildings as the easiest one to talk about. But in Arup's flagship headquarters building in London, a place called 80 Charlotte Street, this has now been designed as a fully smart building, designed from the ground up to enable value creation through data visibility. So we have a wide range of smart technologies, Internet of Things systems, indoor environmental monitoring, real-time data being ported to the cloud, and a wide range of dashboards being used to understand how a building is operating and how people are using it. Now, much of that, of course, is built on the proliferation of new, relatively cheap and effective sensors that can now be installed, from people counting to air quality to desk sensors, environmental controls, QR codes, and the signage associated with those. So there is now a much, much better and more integrated set of solutions that allow us to implement smart buildings. But also it can be done and is being done at every different scale, from the individual workspace through to meeting rooms, through to teams, and through to collective areas or comfort areas. Different kinds of smart technologies being embedded in different places, reflecting the different functions and capabilities that people have for a building. And as importantly, those capabilities, that technology, that infrastructure, those sensors and data systems now being architected in multiple buildings, across portfolios. And we've learned now as an industry how to do that effectively and well, how we build the technical infrastructure, the smart infrastructure, the data systems, and the equipment systems that connect and systematically across multiple buildings. And again, we've done this in our own buildings in Arup, and we're doing this for clients elsewhere. And we're seeing that increasingly happen in different parts of the world and with different kinds of clients. In some cases, people are now moving on, not just from sort of connected and smart buildings, but to real-time building digital twins. And that's with the aim of expanding the functionality of what smart buildings can do. So not just embedding sensors, building data infrastructure and technical infrastructure, but creating virtual replicas of the building in order to enhance what an organization can do with its digital technologies. And so you're seeing real life, real time building digital twins being developed and being used in practice. Now, much of that is because real buildings generate a certain amount of data from the IoT and the sensors that are in them. But there's a capacity to use digital twins to simulate and simulate the operations of buildings in a really significant way, underpinning the transition towards AI-enabled buildings. So a real building might get 30,000 data points, 180,000 readings per hour. A digital twin, you can increase that dramatically, and you can use billions of data to simulate what buildings can do and how you can control them. As those real-world smart buildings are being developed, so we're beginning to see validated use cases really mushroom. Now, in some of those can be very minor but unexpected. So in our own building, for example, we detected high CO2 levels in a meeting room on a Friday night, and that was because there was unknown yoga class going on. And now that was a helpful thing to understand from a health and safety and building controls point of view. And in another area, we found that BMS system had been wrongly identified. In many other buildings that we work on, we find air being heated and cooled at exactly the same time. Only something that you really find out when you start collecting data systematically and properly understanding it. But of course, above and beyond that, a number of really good validated use cases are now coming out of smart buildings that are giving people confidence that the investments are worth making. So for example, being able to accurately plan and understand in real time meeting room occupancy and building occupancy, often done through CO2 monitoring, that allows you to understand and plan how people are using a space. Moving then on from not just understanding, but to diagnosis. Why is it that different elements of the building aren't working properly? And those data that are collecting and now can be used for real-time fault diagnosis, air handling units that so often break down, BMS systems that aren't working properly, HVAC systems likewise. And that can be identified and diagnosed at a really granular level, at the level of the specific element of the building that's not working right. And of course, that immensely improves operations and maintenance and the feel and effectiveness of a building as a place of work. Moving forward, of course, one can start, and people are now starting to optimize controls in real time. There's an ability, obviously, to understand in real time how a building is operating, and an ability, therefore, to improve significantly how different aspects of a building are controlled in order to generate improvements in occupancy, well-being, comfort, or indeed an efficiency of a building's operations. And those, again, those are now coming in real time, and use cases coming in real time out of the systems that are being implemented. And of course, I mentioned already occupancy optimization. Who is in a building, where, when, and how? How is that changing over time? How do you manage your occupancy system to give the best result for individuals and for the building as a whole? And how can one do that to save money and to reduce carbon and to give people a better working environment? These use cases are now flowing out directly and in real time from the smart buildings that are now in implementation. I should add, though, or should conclude by a final point, which is that the drive towards smart buildings was originally very much around the kinds of use cases that I've mentioned already. But now in many parts of the world, sustainability is now coming to drive the development of smart buildings capabilities and solutions. Much of this is being driven by regulation, and the regulations that, for example, the UK government, the European Union government, and the American government are now putting on buildings in terms of carbon disclosure and the adherence to carbon protocols and carbon levels. The result of that is that our building stock, like oil and gas, is now threatened with stranding risk. In other words, buildings whose carbon performance is outside regulatory boundaries, such that those buildings are effectively stranded assets. And a piece of work by Arena that was done recently showed that there was an enormous stranding risk of buildings around the world, greater even than upstream oil and gas. And indeed, when we've done this for a client who I can't identify, but we did a piece of work looking at the building stranding risk as carbon regulations tightened over time, we found that virtually all of their current buildings would be stranded in the next 20 and 30 years. So this is becoming a very powerful driver of change in the buildings sector. And that, of course, can be made clearer by the proliferation of the buildings data we were just talking about. So here's a piece of work that was done recently looking at the energy performance of buildings in practice against their energy labeling. And as you can see, many of the buildings that we looked at are not actually performing at the energy ratings that they previously have had under their labeling systems. This can only come out when you have smart buildings and smart building insight, but is a risk to European buildings because over time, energy labeling will be based on actual performance, not on the boilerplate label. And we know that meeting these carbon requirements, these carbon regulations, can only be achieved by significant reductions in the way in which buildings use and generate their energy. So as a result of this, there's this huge proliferation of interest in how smart buildings can help identify any aspect of a building that relates to energy use and therefore to carbon, from room temperature to ventilation, to people, to humidity, to moisture content, to heat flow through internal walls. All of these are now becoming really important analytical insights in order to tackle the carbon challenge. And some of that can be used at the operational level to inform performance contract monitoring. Much of buildings' energy use is done through performance contracts. And so smart buildings are now going to allow building owners and operators to manage energy providers against those performance contracts. But more importantly, smart buildings and digital twins are allowing us and allowing building owners to find the most effective Paris-proof transition pathways. What is the range of interventions that need to be done in order to ensure that buildings adhere to carbon regulations and don't become stranded assets from an economic point of view? So that's a very, very quick canter through the world of smart buildings. And just to summarize, after many years, smart buildings, we feel, are now moving from the fringe to the mainstream. In part, that's because there's a much better understanding now about how to do them, including across portfolios of buildings. In some organizations, that's moving into fully fledged real-time digital twins that are being used to operate and deliver benefit for buildings. As in the real world, smart buildings are developed, so the use cases are beginning to mushroom, providing a much better ROI than was previously understood. And finally, sustainability is now becoming a very, very powerful driver as building owners understand that they need to adhere to carbon regulations in order for their buildings to remain live assets. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Will. That was a great presentation. And I will turn over to Vincent, who will give his presentation, and then we'll come back to talk to you, Will.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Benson, and thank you, Will, for a great introduction to smart buildings. I think you've covered a lot of ground. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk more about Swire Properties and the introduction to our new Ventures department, and how we are interacting as a major developer with the new technologies that are emerging in this space. So before I start, I think, Will, I completely agree that there's a lot of hope and promise for technologies in light of the sustainability goals that a lot of us developers have, as well as our attention to the customer experience and how technologies can now really facilitate how our everyday interactions with buildings are going, and how to stop having dumb buildings, as Benson would put it. So quick introductions for those who don't know about Swire Properties. We are Swire Properties is a mixed-use developer founded in Hong Kong. We develop and operate mixed-use commercial properties, primarily focused in Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland. And our portfolio comprises of office and retail, apartments, hotels, and luxury residential as well. Cover about 23 million square feet. And we have a group of projects under development as well. So both in the construction phase and in the operational phase, we've been looking at how to make sure that our buildings are smart and sustainable over time. Our group cares a lot about sustainability, and we have our SD 2030 goals, and something that's very well articulated within Swire Properties and also within our publications. So if you have more questions about sort of our sustainability practices, please feel free to look there. Areas that we've invested in to make buildings less dumb, as Benson would put it. We've looked into design and construction technologies. How do we build more iconic buildings in a safer, more timely, more cost-effective and sustainable way, such as using AI to construction scheduling, or using advanced robotics for precision construction, and thereby reducing the amount of wastage in materials in the construction process. We look at smart and sustainable buildings, how to operate our buildings in a more smarter and more sustainable manner. For instance, some of the platforms and technologies that Will just mentioned, how to optimize electricity and other resource consumption. Number three is we do invest in retail operations and O2O companies, and finally in leasing and tenant servicing as well. So our coverage is quite broad. What we look for in our investments, I think this shows to why there has been an emerging space in smart buildings, is because smart buildings actually covers a lot of these grounds. We look at the long-term financial opportunity, and on the left, we look at scalable markets with strong product market fit. We look at the sustainable, profitable business models with a good moat, and we look for opportunities to create and capture good business value, mainly for real estate operators. And smart buildings actually sort of ticks all three of these boxes quite commonly, because there are a lot of buildings globally, a lot of stock that is, as Will was saying, that requires new technologies to make them sustainable in the long run, and a lot of really good thinking about the technologies that can get us there. We also look at strategic synergies when we're investing in companies. We tend to want to help our portfolio companies grow. Can we help our customers and our tenants by partnering with the tech company? And we look to help to learn from these companies as well, in terms of how they can help us operate better and be a stronger developer in the space. So that's it for me in terms of introduction. I look forward to the Q&A session where we can share more about some of the experiences that we had investing and looking at adopting technologies in this space. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Vincent. Let me come back to Will first and ask the question. You had a very good example of your own building adopting smart buildings. What do you think are the key things that are holding back other people right now?
So I think there are two quite big things, Benson. That the first is the sort of technical side. We've learned that to really make a building smart is a challenging thing to do. The number of different systems and subsystems and installations that need to be connected, need to be joined up together to generate good, clean data that allows insight and the return on investment is significant. But something that's been emerging more recently is that it's not just the technical challenge, there's also a sort of social and cultural challenge. That running a smart building in many ways requires a breakdown of the many different silos that building owners and building management companies have had in the past. The FM people separate from the security people, separate from the logistics people, separate from the, from the floor planning people. And so moving towards smart building takes a technical investment and technical skills, but it also takes social and cultural managerial change. And so organizations are having to go through that to get the full benefit of smart technologies.
So do you think the pandemic helped?
I think the pandemic had a sort of impact in some ways. And so we saw many buildings, for example, implement booking systems and smart contact tracking, all of the functions that really related to knowing who's in, who's where, who's sitting where, partly for things like contact tracing and for, COVID protocols and control. And that sort of upped that aspect of things. But I think we still need to see much, much wider investment and delivery of smart buildings at scale to realize the full benefit. So it sort of gave it a nudge, but perhaps not quite the big shove we were all hoping for. And I think we still need to be making the case for what smart buildings can do in order to see this really, really grow and develop.
Right. So I guess another question for you is, meanwhile, what do you think the biggest impact for an owner to adopt smart is going to be?
So I think the biggest impacts of smart buildings in the near future is going to be the kinds of operational improvements that I mentioned in my talk and Vincent touched on as well. You can see how the development of really, good insight is going to allow our buildings to be managed and our people in them to be in better environments than they were previously. But I think there are two tectonic changes that are going to happen following on from that. The world of the equipment manufacturers and the people who supply buildings is going to change completely to being one that is digital, it's open, interoperable, and is really governed by an API economy in the way other sectors have become in the past. And that's going to be a huge change for so many people in the building sector. And secondly, and this is, I think, the ultimate dream, as we understand better how we should really be operating buildings, I think we'll understand better how we should design buildings and be linking together the tools that design buildings, the tools that show what they should be doing. And at some point down the line, we're going to be automating and generating all of those things simultaneously in an end-to-end way. So huge benefit coming just from operating buildings, but I think then a fundamental reorientation of the whole market and a big, big opportunity around design and operate simultaneously.
So one last multiple choice question to you, Will, and then we'll switch over to Vincent. Multiple choice is, who do you think will be the driver for pushing building to become smart? Is it the owner, the facility manager, or is it the individual tenants actually using the building? And pick one.
Can I go D? I think much of this is being now driven by government and regulation and through public investment. And that's the change that I've seen happen in the last 12 to 18 months. A big change from waiting for building operators and tenants to this being driven very fundamentally by sustainability and by governments who see an economic opportunity from smart buildings. That's really changing the market, I think.
Great, which is a perfect segue for us to switch over to ask of a building owner, Swire Properties. So Vincent, you mentioned that one of the biggest things is that you can change how people inside the buildings actually start using the building. Tell us about it. That's fascinating.
Sure, thanks, Benson. I think smart buildings have given us an opportunity to engage people who work in our buildings or operate in our buildings in a very different way, in that you can provide a lot more timely information about how energy is being used or waste is being disposed of in ways that you couldn't have before. So we've found it helpful to be able to change the behaviors and to encourage and incentivize behaviors within our buildings and within our communities. And that's at the end of the day, the technology can only change so much at the building layer. But once it's displayed to the tenants and once it's used among more people, we can actually influence behaviors that can actually ultimately make people smarter as well as buildings.
So I'll follow the question and ask. You're talking about, let's imagine you're saying that, one Taikoo Place is a smart building. You have your tenants, you have your shop owners, you have your office tenants, you have people working there day in, day out. If you ask them, if we can make it smart, what do you think they'll be, first of all, asking you to be able to do?
That's a great question, Benson. And I think we actually regularly ask our tenants, about operating improvements and what they would like to see. Obviously, I think a few things come to mind. One is sustainability has been quite big. How can they take part? How can we encourage the tracking of sustainability, and how do we make sure that we help our partners and our tenants comply with their sustainability goals or even overreach their sustainability goals? So that's something that's been very much talked about among our tenant community. The second we hear, is convenience, right? It's access to that data, it's access to the facilities, and buildings being more responsive to the needs of people. So having buildings that are almost living for the tenants that we serve. So those are the two major themes that we think have encouraged the adoption of smart technologies.
So I'll switch then to the difficulties of adopting to changes, because Dr. Will was saying just now that a big part of the problem is people's unwillingness to change their ways. There are silos, there are existing prejudices and so on. How do you, in a sense, break that down and put that to use, for example, in your new smart buildings?
Yeah, thanks, Benson. I think we're quite lucky to have an organization that has a very articulate sustainability goal and very customer-centric mindset, where we are trying to deliver against the things that our customers are asking for. And it's something that's embedded within the goals of the individuals who are working around the organization. So, when the benefits of the technologies are well articulated, I think we're one of the first, the most daring companies to try some of the new technologies coming in, and working with Thomas and Benson on Neuron, for instance, as one example, right? I think we're quite willing to innovate and daring to change because of the KPIs and the goals that we've set internally. But I think that the challenges that Will mentioned are still something that's quite poignant to us, in that many of the buildings that are built, whether it's our own portfolio or otherwise, are unique individual creatures, because they're built at different times, they have different specifications and different requirements and different systems. And so the challenge is that a lot of these buildings were built before the cloud was invented, or before there was an imagination that cloud technologies can influence how they're operated. So going back to older buildings, or going back to buildings that have very different specifications and trying to adopt something scalable is oftentimes the challenge. So oftentimes there's not one right answer to the technology, but a suite of answers that we have to, and a suite of changes that we have to adopt. So I think that's been the main challenge.
Interesting. So you're saying that as developers, you can make changes happen. Now, I'll switch to another question, which is, you have a 50 million pot of gold, Vincent. And so I'm sure a lot of our audience, tech companies would love to ask of you, how do you advise people who want to, in a sense, get a bit of that gold, shall we say, and be invested by Swire?
I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone who is on this call and to discuss with you specific plans. But I think the importance here is being very articulate on the problem that's being solved, and making sure that the problem is solved in a accurate and in a robust manner. I think there are a lot of companies that we see that are sort of aiming big at problems, but sometimes aren't tackling the problem with with the right sort of technology solution, or may have not considered the user side and how to change minds and how to change behaviors within companies. So we look for companies that are solving a big problem, have some technology moat or some technology insight that's different, and are articulate in how they fit into the operations of typical real estate customer companies. So, and there are a lot of you out there, so I'm very excited to be speaking to any of you.
Great. Well, thank you, Vincent. I think I'll open up and ask our two other panels. Dan, hi, as head of innovation, which we were, listening to Vincent, and we'll talk about innovation. And we listened to both saying that this is not ethereal, intangible innovation we're looking for, but very tangible innovation. And I think the fact that you're with MTR, a very, very tangible operation. Tell us about innovation tangibly.
Yeah, thanks, Benson, for having me here. And I think given the topic is smart building, then maybe I'll use that as the topic here, not touch onto the other areas. And I would say, how do we make this tangible? I would say that, maybe 4 aspects of making a building smart, from, outside exterior through to interior, then to digital, then to smart city. And I'll give a bit of an example of what I mean by that. And so how do you make the exterior of a building, the management of a building, smarter? We've started to try all sorts of different technologies. And in fact, we've been using drones to help us to inspect the exterior of buildings, to allow us to provide better maintenance. It's exterior areas that are sometimes even hard to reach. So some buildings have an interior well where you have the piping, hard to reach. And we're also using drones and other technologies there to kind of help us maintain that better. So that's on the exterior of a building. Then if you go from exterior to interior, we have started to do things like using, let's say, IoT, sensor technologies, coupled with machine learning. And the specific use case is, how do we reduce the energy usage using smart algorithms, coupled with the data, the real-time data that they're getting from these sensors all across the building. And in fact, this is a live pilot that we're actually doing with your portfolio company, with Neuron. So we're working with Thomas and his team to actually implement that type of a use case. And what's quite interesting for us is that we have different types of buildings, right? So we have, commercial, residential, where we're using kind of the exterior example I mentioned earlier. This particular example on the inside is actually our mall building. And so we're actually using it at one of our malls. And what's so interesting is that now we get into a situation where there are like multiple use cases, because many of our malls, and this particular mall, for example, is right next to our station. And so actually we're taking station data in terms of traffic flow to help predict kind of what might happen in the traffic into our malls before it happens. So that's kind of on the interior, how we're trying to make that smart. Then I think the third aspect is, okay, well now, how do we take another step? And, this then gets into the digital area. And when we talk about digital, we talk about things like, BIM, common data environments, things of that sort. Certainly for all of our new construction at MTR, it's all starting with BIM to begin with. And in addition, of course, we are also looking at existing buildings. And we are exploring technologies that will help us to, let's say, better convert our existing information into real 3D models that then can be tapped into further information to help us to better manage these assets. So that's kind of the third level in. And I think just the final area now, how do we go from, a single building and buildings being smart to the level of a smart city? And certainly the topic of smart city is something that we at MTR have been looking at very closely. And we believe we have a role to play here as well. And that is, okay, now, if we go from buildings and then with digital and information into smart city, one of the key foundations is data, especially open data between different players, different members of a smart city. And as an example of what we were doing in this arena, we've recently, and we've publicly said this, we've signed an agreement with Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And in this agreement, one of the areas is open data. And so we've selected a particular open data use case where not only will we be sharing and using our data, but then we're starting to explore the different ways whereby we can, work with other partners, other building operators, other use cases, to ultimately provide a more efficient, smarter experience for actually the residents, the people who are using this, but then also kind of companies like ours that manage and build these properties. So that's kind of MTR smart building on 4 aspects.
Fantastic. I think I want to focus a little bit on drones, because that is a very visual thing. So how do you use drones with the outside of buildings? Tell us, how do you fly the drones? What do you use it for? It's fascinating.
Yeah, normally, when you look at and expect building exteriors, it's a very manual process. And you go around, it's very manual and somewhat dangerous, to be honest. And in some ways, it's very, very hard to get very granular and close to these areas that we're looking at. And so one way we're using the drones is, obviously we're using the drones to get close and fly close enough to the exterior to be able to see the things you need to see. On the drones, we're employing different types of sensors. So of course we have cameras, but different cameras, but even things like thermal to help us look maybe even slightly beneath the exterior. And, and I think one of the good things is once you have that kind of data input, drones, and we're looking at ways that help us then also to pinpoint its position. And so, we know exactly kind of where we see maybe a micro fissure. And then, of course, on top of that, now we have the data coming in. And certainly we are developing and looking at different algorithms, including those that use machine learning, to then help us more intelligently say, well, that little fissure you saw, is that a problem? That heat there, is that something that we should look into? So this provides a lot more tools for us to more intelligently manage the building, but more importantly, to prevent problems before they happen.
Great. Well, I think this is a natural way to start switching over to Thomas. Thomas, hi.
Hi, Benson.
The question I want to ask of you is that several times today already, we have talked about digital twins. Can you tell us a little bit about digital twins and how that is at the heart of Neuron? I think that will be fascinating.
Oh, it certainly is at the heart of Neuron and at the heart of the new smart buildings. We talk about all the, as Dan talked about, algorithm as well, and drones, devices. All these things are on the peripheral. But how they surface the building, it really depends on how you have a good model of your building. And that's why digital twin is the most important thing right in the middle, in there, where you can collect the information, where you can interpret it, and where you can use it back on the building. So in Neuron, we are also trying to tackle the most difficult part there. As Will mentioned before, it's difficult to push it out to people. People would have their own considerations. Technology is moving all the time. And that's why Neuron is really the platform, forming the connection with all these different things. And digital twin is the super imposition onto the platform so that you can use it onto your own building. So that's how Neuron tackles the problem.
Right. So we talked about data models and digital twins and encourage people to really look at it. I'll switch to another thing, which is clearly, you are trying to push Neuron to many, many buildings. And, not many people are like, Vincent and Swire, very, very enlightened. What do you think are the biggest resistance, their refusal to take action? Are they not worried about becoming dumb?
Of course they worry about it, but at the end of the day, as Will said it before as well, it's a question of cost. And when technology is not there, the risk of spending the money and the cost effectiveness of the money you spend is very, very big question for the owners of the buildings. Yeah, we have the people with the big budget building new buildings, building the smartest, like our project with Vincent, with Swire, about all the new buildings that they are building. That's good and well, and we can use all the technologies that we'll talk about, the whys and the whats, how to do it. But at the end of the day, there are also all these other older buildings. They have the problems in there that they need to resolve. At the end of the day, for them, it's spending the money and how they make the money worth it. And so for Neuron, it's about trying to see what is the biggest problem they are facing right now and try to resolve those problems for them. And Neuron is trying to decompose all the goodies that we'll talk about into atoms, into actionable packages for the people to resolve the problems. And only by doing that, people can see, now I can only spend a little bit of money and get the results, the benefits that I'm looking for. So that's how Neuron's trying to tackle the difficult problem.
Okay, so Thomas, again, changing topics again. I think I remember you told me before that initially Neuron aspired to be just the brain of the building, and yet you have a new vision, which is that it should also be the nervous system for the entire city. I like that. Can you talk a little bit on how the building and the city is interconnected, the nervous system that you're talking about? Because I think that's where Dan was talking about, where it's not the individual building, it's the cities, right? So yes. Tell us about what is the nervous system of Neuron then.
Well, basically, as we all say, smart buildings are the building blocks of the smart cities. When everybody, all the governments are pushing for smart cities, then they need to look at how we get all the smart buildings talk to each other. And it is the neural system. What is important in there behind it, I think it was Vincent who mentioned the word there as well, or was Will. It's the API. It really is about how we standardize that on our platform so that different buildings, when we collect the information, we would have similar information, how we handle them and use our atoms to do different things in there. And so that is how we tackle the smart buildings in a smart city. And the neural network is how you use all the devices, the drones, the robots, the IoT devices. When you get the information, we want the information to come back to the same processor, similar processes that we have in Neuron. And by doing that, then we have uniform information across the city. I'm sure that's something that Dan is looking for as well with the rail network across the city. So hopefully we can work together onto a neural network that can collect information about all the activities in different parts of the city together.
Thank you, Thomas. That's great. Now let me throw a question out for the entire sort of panel. And my question is this, which is that from where I sit as a Hong Konger, and out of 5 of us, you're surrounded, well, we are all Hong Kongers. How can we stop Hong Kong from becoming a dumb city? Because we are already behind Shenzhen and we are behind Singapore. And I'll be a little bit sharp here. I do believe that if we don't do something, we need more of Vincent and Swire. How do we stop Hong Kong from becoming the dumb city of Asia? What do you think, everyone? Who wants to go first? Remember to unmute.
Well, Benson, I'm not a Hong Kong expert, but let me try and answer that a little bit. And it picks up something of what fellow panelists have been saying, which is something that's held smart buildings back has been the high cost sometimes, the technical complexity, and the uncertain use cases. And that's meant that the costs of action have been high in the eyes of people who own and operate buildings. What the sustainability regulations that I was mentioning earlier have done, and why they're changing the market in Europe certainly, is suddenly the costs of inaction become really high, because you risk your entire asset becoming worthless in the next few years. Now, that is a high cost. Doing nothing now has a really, really high cost, because you could find yourself with a building that you're not allowed to use, you're not allowed to, in it for any use class. So that's the way that some of the in this case, carbon regulations have changed the calculus for people towards investment, towards smart, towards all the things that Dan, Vincent, and Thomas have been talking about. So I would try, if I was in the Hong Kong government or advising the Hong Kong government, of bringing together a very powerful and clear set of forward regulations on buildings that increase the cost of inaction, at the same time as publicizing the kinds of use cases and the kinds of tools like Neuron and other things which allow building owners and operators to do this. So I think it's a sort of both sides of an attack that can transform potentially an area like Hong Kong.
Great, thank you, Will. Well, clearly the next person I should ask is Vincent. You're the enlightened one, and Swire is leading the charge. How do we turn all the other people to do the same? What do you think?
Yeah, Benson, I think it's a good question. I think the smart buildings field is still rather new, right? So I think even the Singapore and Shenzhen's they were all starting in a relatively new space, and there's a lot of room for improvement across the board. For Hong Kong, I think forums like this and sharing sessions that have started to pick up more in light of the relaxed social regulations have really helped accelerate the pace of conversation in Hong Kong, and I think I'm encouraged. I think it'll be continuing, and as we relax sort of travel restrictions as well, I think we've seen a lot more companies be willing to come to Hong Kong and work with operators, or for Hong Kong companies to be able to go abroad and to accelerate their growth as well. So I'm quite optimistic actually that there's a lot of smart talents and a lot of good sort of momentum among our tenants and among the developers here to make a difference. And I think I think as the social regulations go away and travel regulations sort of subside as well, I think we're going into a strong 2023.
Fantastic. So clearly, I'm going to buck Dan. Dan, you're the MTR. Everybody travel in your thing. And meanwhile, you have a lot of properties. How can you be the role model for getting Hong Kong to be smart?
Yeah, as I mentioned a bit earlier, we are starting to try lots of things in terms of using technology to make our properties smarter. I think a lot of those are not yet, I guess, public. We're going through the process of trying to find out what works in the best way, in a way that is also financially sustainable. So a little bit, I think that we've heard a couple of panelists mention is that I think there is a broad willingness for everyone to try new things. And a little bit sometimes the question is that, okay, is it financially sustainable? Is the business model working in the proper way? So part of what we are doing as well with these pilots is not just testing the technology and if it works properly, which is a part of it, but then also what's the cost of it, both in terms of deploying, developing, but then also maintaining it over time. And so we're taking steps already. And as I mentioned in my earlier talk, kind of 4 aspects of it, right? It's just one piece. So there's much more work to be done, and we're already taking steps there.
Well, I'll turn to Thomas. How do you think Neuron can play a part? And why does Hong Kong need a Neuron?
Well, we are playing 2 important parts in there. First, being the 4th person to answer this question, I can hear all the other answers, and I like Will's answer about the stick approach. There will be more requirements, but that would only apply to the buildings that are proactively trying to improve themselves with the big budget that they have. So that's one way Neuron is helping them. We are working with Arup on the big building projects. We make sure that they meet the best standards. But I also like Vincent's answer that, hey, after COVID, Hong Kong's coming back. So we see a new push, a new initiative for the not so old buildings with lots of problems, with small budgets, to see, hey, it's time for us to act. Otherwise, I will lose out to my competitors in my same class of buildings. So these people, for them, Neuron is working on the small solutions that they can quickly adopt, easy to buy, and then lots of benefits for them. So that is what we're doing. So two, for those who react to the stakes, the big buildings, we work with them, and also we want to work with the people who like the carrots. They are the older buildings who want to be the first one off the block compared to their competitors. The Neuron would have all the little products for them.
Okay, well, let me ask a second question, much more focus on the building itself. We talked about smart buildings. We talked about many applications, let's each of us name the 3 biggest application that you think will convince the owner to pay the price, shall we say. Let's start with Thomas now and go the other way. What do you think? What are 3 biggest things that will convince the owner in a smart building?
The first one is certainly cost cutting. So it's energy and ESG. They have to make sure that they can meet all those requirements, cutting all the costs of meeting all those ESG requirements. So that's the first one. The second one is about how they earn the money. So basically, it's about providing all the services they can to the tenants. The leasing department, the tenants would need to do their own ESG reporting. So we have to give them all the accounts, all the numbers for them to do their ESG reporting. So we have to service the customers better. So that's the second one. The third one would be all the IoT devices. We want to make sure that they can use the latest technologies to the best that they can do. So it's the digital twin with the ability to take the latest IoT devices into use for them.
Great. What about you, Dan? Do you agree with that? And what do you think are the 3 things that would convince MTR CFO to pay for a building to become smart?
I think I'll give you an extra. I'll give you 4, Benson. So I think some of the key criteria that would really help energize this is, number 1, and this is echoing a little bit what Thomas just said. One is that is this something that can really help me reduce costs? Is it going to help me do that, right? Whether it's energy savings or maintenance, that's one criteria. And then number 2, if you flip that around, might it be something that could provide new opportunities for more income or revenue? So that's kind of bottom line and top line. I think then there's a third piece here actually, which is actually really the user experience, right? Which is so important. The user experience of the people that reside and use the buildings, the people that maintain it, right? The people that that are around it. So kind of the user experience, is that improved? So those are 3. The fourth one, I think, and this is also important for a company like an MTR, is there a contribution to the community here in some way? Are we, a big part of what we do is connecting communities. And so is there something there that then would help us to fulfill that role as well? So those would be the 4 key pieces, I would say, in terms of moving to the next phase.
So what about you, Vincent? What are the top 3 reasons you take to your CFO and say, I need this, pay for it?
I think, not to repeat what Thomas and Dan are saying, I think they covered a lot of ground. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to dive deeper into the customer experience. I think the data really enables us to provide a superior experience and to make our tenants happier and more productive. And that would include things like comfort, making sure it's comfortable to be in those environments, to have the right levels of productivity within the spaces, to have maintenance done at the right time so that you don't have elevators malfunctioning or other devices, right? Could be heaters and coolers as well, malfunctioning, making sure that they're operating smoothly, and safety, right, for the tenant as well. So making sure we have the right people entering the right spaces conveniently and safely, and that everything that they're operating is safe. So I think there's quite a lot, and there's quite a lot in smart buildings that makes the tenant experience significantly better, and therefore help us maintain some of the best buildings and the best tenants in the cities that we're in.
I like the way you think about this, Vincent. So I would encourage everybody else to join in, because Vincent is talking about a product. I think ultimately, to quote, as they say, it's the product, stupid, right? Because if the product is better, right now, buildings are manual, right? Entirely manual, and yet we don't expect anything automated about it. So I like what you said, Vincent, that it's all about user experience. And if yours is head and shoulders better than the next one, people will pay for it. People will absolutely pay for it. If people don't pay, it only becomes, as you say, weird. Anyway, so what do you think about that? What do anybody else think about that?
Well, Benson, if I can maybe add on top of this topic of user experience, I think that is really important. And I think it's also important to understand there are different types of users that we need to think about, especially if we're thinking about it as a product. Certainly the tenant, of course, and a lot of the use cases we talked today are the tenant, but there are many, many stakeholders. There are the people that are managing that asset. And to those people, right, and it's often a very, very hard job, to those people, is it something that helps their job and their experience? Is that a good experience, right? And they're under pressure, kind of from all aspects. There are other stakeholders as well, right? That the people that are around your neighbors, right? And so I think kind of it's worthwhile, as we're talking about this topic, to kind of expand that definition to all these different kind of users.
I think that's absolutely right. And I wanted to inject into the conversation sort of recognition that actually smart buildings is much more than just smart offices, and the building's product, needs to work and can work, and smart buildings as a product can work, in fantastic ways for different kinds of building owners and building operators. So if you're a precision manufacturer or a data center, the smart building product will allow you to do all the things around energy costs and optimization that have been mentioned, but also create an absolutely clean and clinical environment that you can manage to the highest possible specification, which is absolutely what you'll need if you're the owner and operator of that kind of facility. Likewise, if you're a hospital, hospitals are replete with clinical challenges, with infection challenges, but also are really, from an operational point of view, replete with inefficiency. The smart hospital as a product will allow hospital managers and owners to develop hospitals that are safer, that work better for patients and for clinical staff as well. And then even in the office environment, one of the things we're seeing, of course, globally, is a reluctance for many staff to come back into the office environment. And so the smart building product is a place where people might actually want to come and work together, because you can no longer force people to come into the office. In many ways, you have to sort of persuade them that it's a place of innovation, of comfort, of safety, of wellness, of cooperation. And I think smart buildings will are part of offering that to users as well. So I think that point about the user experience and what the building product is really, really powerful. And it plays out, positively in many, many different kinds of buildings, not just offices, but almost all other sorts of buildings too.
Well, thank you very much. I think that was a great session. I think we have a chance to reinvent the building, and we came from 4 different aspects. Thank you to our presenters and our panelists. You've been watching Venturous Group, Smart City Tech Week, and we've been talking about smart building. So this is Benson Tam and Will and Vincent and Dan and Thomas signing off, and have a great morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you. Bye.